Always like it when Wednesday comes around and we get to hear some great music there. That means it's time for Helping Seniors of Brevard, and we're going to get things underway right now with the host of Helping Seniors of Brevard and the other part of the Daily Double that we always like to call it, the Executive Director of Helping Seniors of Brevard. Here is none other than Kerry Fink. Hi, Kerry.
Hey, John Harper. It's always fun to be on the radio lunchtime Wednesday. It's our regular gathering with the great music and the great guests and the great information that's all about helping seniors. So welcome to those of you tuning in on 90.3 FM, WEJF, and also a shout-out to everybody who listens online at WEJF.net. And then as well, for those of you who might be catching this as a podcast, because more or less once the show has aired, we end up putting this out on everything from Apple iTunes to Spotify to iHeartRadio to YouTube podcasts. It's just wherever you find a podcast, look for Helping Seniors, because the goal of this is to get information to you that will help you in your aging plan. And so on behalf of our president and founder, Joe Steckler, our operations director, Nancy Deerdorf, our information specialist, Karen Warnland, and our entire team of growing team of volunteers that help make the work of the nonprofit 100% local to Brevard County possible. Just welcome to the show today. I think you're going to get some things that are going to help you save some money on today, because you're going to get an insight. We're going to talk about prescriptions today, and in the studio with me is a great friend of the Helping Seniors organization. He's been friends with Helping Seniors. We were talking about this. He's into, I think, going into his 12th or 13th year of service in the community. He's a wonderful guy. His name is Joe Pons, and he has a company called Canadian Meds of Melbourne. Welcome, Joe. How are you?
Wonderfully well, thank you.
You know, before we got on the air, I was asking, I said, I remember very early on in the Helping Seniors world that we were filming television, and in those days, Joe was hosting the television shows, and I remember you did several shows, and I was thinking, like, my goodness, that's been more than a day or two. You have been at this for quite some time.
Yes, sir, more than a decade.
So. Yeah. Well, first of all, just so you get a little background, because we're going to go into the backstory of why Canadian Meds of Melbourne is such a great resource here locally, and it's because Joe Pons thought this was a great idea. Joe himself, thank you for your service, sir, like his dad was in the U.S. Army, and you kind of stumbled into some of the challenges that people have managing the cost of prescriptions through your own experience. And I'm going to ask you to talk a little bit about that story, because I think it's pretty powerful and explains where things are. But I want to kind of back up a notch even before we get there, because one of the questions that I asked Joe, I said, here we are. Now that you've been doing this for well over a decade, it sounds like it's getting close to a decade and a half, you've helped a lot of people save a lot of money on their prescriptions through Canadian Meds of Melbourne. And I was asking Joe, I said, has it changed a lot? What have you noticed has changed over the years? And I thought how you answered that was pretty interesting.
Yes, sir. So let's start with the big issue, which is we have more seniors.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. We have more seniors now than we did a decade ago. Then we have more people seeing the doctor on a regular basis, which means the concept behind the Affordable Care Act, or at least one of them is that instead of paying so much money for the catastrophic illnesses that come over time, like heart attack, stroke, etc., let's catch it early. Mm-hmm. Let's get people into the doctor, let them come once a year, and that way we can see if we need to make any changes, particularly using medication. Mm-hmm. Well, we have now what has been called an epidemic or pandemic of diabetes, mm-hmm. and all the related things that come with it, to include heart attack, stroke, the basic things that people go to the emergency room for. They don't find out they're diabetic until they get there. Yes.
And so now that people are discovering that, hey, there could be a problem and medication could resolve that, it's causing more people to discover that they need these prescriptions, right?
That is correct. And like myself, until the problem hits home, most people don't have a concept of how much prescription medication costs.
Yeah. Yeah. We talk about this a lot in the work of helping seniors because Joe has always talked about it. I'm talking about Joe Steckler, our president and founder. He's always talked about a thing called making an aging plan. And, I equate that to we who live in Florida get what a hurricane plan is. It doesn't mean we want the hurricane. It just means we want to have a plan and be prepared about it. Well, Joe has often talked about we need an aging plan for the same kind of reason. You don't want a problem, but you want to have thought through what you might do or how you're going to respond if one pops up on the horizon. And just like with a hurricane, some things are kind of predictable when it comes to aging, and you want to be in that zone where you've already kind of thought this through because Joe, you've been around a while with us, so you know that we, for years, have operated the County Senior Information Helpline. That's that free call at 321-473-7770. I'll say it again, 321-473-7770. That free call connects seniors and those who love and care for them with resources that will make a difference for them whatever challenge that they're running themselves into. And we get calls about everything, as you know, Joe, because you're right there in Joe's Senior Resource Center. Your office is right there with us in that beautiful Omni Healthcare building right there on the medical campus in downtown Melbourne. But when we take these calls, people are calling about everything: housing, legal, medical, financial, transportation, you name it. We get the calls, prescriptions, I can't afford my medicines. All these calls come into the center. And it's really kind of only made what Joe was saying, Joe Steckler, very important from day one, is the aging plan becomes that much more important because usually a lot of times the calls that we get on that helpline are from people who are already experiencing a real challenge that's kind of a whether they call it in the movies clear and present danger. You got to do something now about this thing. And the problem is when you're in that you got to do something now about this thing, your options are limited, they get very expensive, and you're making decisions under terrible amounts of stress. Whereas the whole thing that Joe has talked about in making an aging plan, which we euphemistically call, let's take some time, let's get our ducks in a row, means while we have the luxury of time and more options that come with the luxury of time, probably makes things more affordable, we can map out a good strategy and really help ourselves. And so, Joe, as we've talked about this, we said, okay, if the motto is let's help you get your ducks in a row, there's two things we've learned along the way. Number one, we say, be wise like an owl. Don't try this on your own, meaning there are people you can go to get help with the things that you're running into or trying to plan for on your aging journey that really know the lay of the land. You don't have to get out there and start, we're going to talk about this a lot, but I can imagine, particularly in your business of helping with prescriptions, people can get out there on the internet and start searching for things and maybe find some not so reputable places, maybe some scammy places, or even maybe if they send you the medication, you can't be sure it's the medication you really need. Mm-hmm. So there's that whole side of it. And then the other corollary that we've added to this, which is we say, don't be an ostrich, right? Don't stick your head in the sand. Let's go ahead and tackle some of these things, unpleasant as they may be to think about. But if we tackle them now, we're going to have great peace and enjoyment later because we've dealt with them, and then we can put them aside and keep moving forward and enjoy what we're trying to do in life. And so, Joe, that kind of makes me want to circle back and ask you, with Canadian Meds, that really is the soul of what you try to do. You try to help seniors and their families find the most appropriate prescription solution, right?
That is absolutely correct. We don't prescribe anything. That's the doctor's job. The fact is that many people, when they get prescribed a medication, it's a shock. Mm-hmm. They see the doctor, and the doctor says, here, get this filled. They go to their local pharmacy, and then they say with a straight face, okay, well, this will cost you $1,000. How do you want to pay for that? Mm-hmm. Now, I don't know about you, but I wasn't born independently wealthy. I don't have a rich Uncle Vinny who can take care of such things, and most people don't.
Right.
So they leave it there sitting at the counter, and then they continue along their path, like we're talking about having an aging plan. Well, they continue along the path of their life doing what they do without the proper medication, merely because of a price tag. We help solve that solution.
That is so important because I can tell you how often Nancy and Karen get calls from folks who are in that position. It's really, if you'll excuse the expression, I think it's deplorable that we in our country allow this to happen, but it does happen. I don't know. I'm not smart enough to know the solution, but we get calls from people who say, I got to make a decision. Am I going to get something to eat or am I going to take my medication? I guess this is something you hear quite often too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. When I first started, I had a client come to me who was getting a second mortgage because he and his wife were getting on a new medication, one each.
A second mortgage?
A second mortgage. The option of eating versus taking medication was a mixed bag. We had people who decided, well, you know what, I'm going to eat low-cost food. Mm-hmm. And sadly, the regulations on the purchase of pet food has been reflected in the fact that there are people who are in such dire straits that they would buy pet food in order to afford their medications. Well, now in 2024, I think we're a little bit more resilient because of the events that occurred a few years ago. Mm-hmm. People decided that, you know what, I'm just not going to take the medication. If the doctor can't find me something that I can afford, I simply won't take it.
And I'm sure we could probably sit here and share stories back and forth where we know of people, seniors, who lost their lives because they just chose to not afford the medication. Well, maybe not chose. That's giving way too much judgment upon that. But, right. They just didn't. They weren't able to afford their medication. And then it caused, like you said, that big situation that really took them out of the picture permanently.
Absolutely. And it's the small things. It's the everyday things. The silent killer, which is high blood pressure. The incidents that are occurring where most people are under lots and lots of stress.
Right.
That blood pressure goes up and stays up day after day, month after month, year after year. And because of the fact that it costs so much money over the course of a particular year, that becomes the precursor of the catastrophic events that we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, so there's a lot of different things that happen along the way, right? Somebody gets a new prescription, they find out it's not affordable, so then they just say, well, that's not happening, so I'm moving on, but then they don't get any help that the doctor is hoping that they'll get, or worse yet, it could become life-threatening because they're not doing as the doctor had recommended. So you got that whole side of it. Then you've got this whole other side, right, where maybe it's just becoming unaffordable because the doctor has enough prescriptions lined up that you are supposed to be taking that it's now really cutting into your ability to make those choices. Like, am I going to eat? Am I going to pay my rent? Am I going to take my medicine? Which of the three am I going to do, That's
absolutely correct. There used to be, at least in my budget, a miscellaneous category. And I think most people had things like gasoline and those type of things that were put into that category, which now have their own category because as life continues on and we have economic struggles of our own, those medications start to bite into that. Right.
And I guess because you've been doing this now for quite a while, you've seen the impact that it makes. But I guess the question as we're setting up setting up the problem, and fortunately we have a solution that's worth taking a look at. We're talking with Joe Pons, Canadian Meds of Melbourne, and that is really your reason to do this. It's really a business, but it's also your passion is to help people find a way to make their medications affordable. And I was talking with a lady that is also part of our center, and she's involved in the Helping Seniors organization. Her name is Dr. Cressida Cornish. She is a licensed pharmacist by trade. She's now retired. Her and her husband have a ministry called Faith Walk by Two, and so you'll see them a lot when we're around the center. But I guess one of the things I was going to bring up is she's talked a lot about her goal is to help people work through, because, a lot of us will go to one doctor and we get one prescription and then we get referred to another doctor and there's another prescription. And so one of her big deals is about what they call polypharmacy, which is making sure that the medications that you've been prescribed aren't like either interacting with each other to cause some kind of a problem, but also where it might be possible is to see if there's anything that can come off of that list. So I'm kind of imagining as all this goes down the road, you and her are going to be great friends because there's a lot of work that you're going to be able to accomplish together at the center. But before we get into all that, I really want to just come back and say, because I think the story is fascinating. You got into this. Remember there was a guy on TV who liked the shaver so much he bought the company. It was like a commercial back in the 60s or 70s. But you're almost like that. You're the guy who liked the idea of Canadian Meds so much. You said, let me bring this to Melbourne. Talk about how this happened to you personally.
Short story long, I got sick. I was doing defense contracting, so I had a great salary, but no benefits. And as a veteran, I didn't have to worry so much about that. However, part of the process then, it's gotten so much better now, is that we had to collect all of the individual bills. Mm-hmm. That's from every doctor I saw, the hospital, the medication, all of that. Speaking to the young lady who had the receipt for the medication, she told me that she was not going to give it to me because, in her words, nobody ever paid it. And I explained to her that my responsibility is not everyone else's. I need to get that receipt. I need to get it itemized and get it to the VA. Well, she gave it to me, and it was in the neighborhood of about $6,000.
Wow.
And that was for a 5-day, 4-night stay. At that particular point, we're talking about $12,000 to $16,000 just for the room.
Wow.
And when I talk to seniors about having a vacation, where could you go in the world and pay $12,000 over the course of a short week? Right? I mean, you can go to the Waldorf Astoria for that kind of money.
At least.
Yeah, right? And it wasn't a private room.
Yeah.
I had a gentleman next to me. So I ended up having the internal conversation of what happens to John or Jane citizen who comes up with a chronic, lifelong condition or disease. They have the bills that I would have for the hospital stay, and then they're hit with a prescription bill of $1,000 a month. Mm. That is in the extreme, but it happens all the time. There's a problem with that. Here we are in the greatest country in the world, and people cannot afford to have the quality of life that they deserve mm-hmm. because of the cost of medication. Mm-hmm. A family friend, Charlie Richer, he started the original Canadian Meds in 2002, and we sat down, did the demographics, did the business plan, and here we are today in 2024 serving our community, and our community has extended to the entire United States because of the need, all because I got sick.
Wow. Well, thank you for turning your pain into everybody's blessing. Wow. I think when you talk about this, we're talking with Joe Pons. The company is Canadian Meds of Melbourne. Really a great service here locally because you help people navigate the complexities of the expense of their prescriptions. And I guess what you, because we have had the conversation before, what you prefer to do is sit down with somebody and look over their list of medications that the doctor has prescribed, and then you're able to say, well, here's an option for this or here's an option for that. And it doesn't cost them anything to sit down with you, and it might end up saving them a lot of money based on what you're able to do with that list.
Absolutely. To your point earlier, because some people see more than one doctor, they get prescribed sometimes the exact same medication. And because we as lay people don't know the difference between warfarin and Coumadin being the same thing, we think that we're taking two different medications. Mm-hmm. Well, many times our pharmacists have caught that between that and drug interactions, even with the over-the-counter supplements. Well, guess what? We need to plan for that. We need to make sure that the individual who's taking these medications, now they're being double charged for the medication, taking twice as much, which causes more problems.
Yeah.
And part of that plan is sitting down, figuring out what we can do for their out-of-pocket costs for the entire year to be reduced.
Yeah, I know when we get into the second half of the show, there's several things that I really am going to want to kind of like drill down on this whole topic. Number one of which is that I really want us to have a conversation about. I don't think people understand a thing called donut hole. In fact, I was telling you before we got on the air, last week on the radio, we had Jennifer Barton of Seniors Helping Seniors, and we had Jerry Hadlock Jr., who is kind of an expert on Medicare and Medicaid and those kind of things. And the conversation turned around to the problem of Medicare Part D, which, if I'm saying that correct, that's the part that has to do with your prescriptions.
Correct.
And we got into a pretty deep discussion of donut hole and some things that you, as the consumer, might want to understand separate and apart. Even if those co-payments seem to be okay down at the local drugstore, you could be still running yourself into a problem later in the year. So even if you think you have your drug costs under control, it still would seem like it would make sense to sit down with Joe Pons and say, here's what I got. How does this look to you? How is this going to work out for me through the whole year? I guess that's the kind of thing I've seen you be very generous with your time, and just, even if there's nothing you can do to help, you seem to be still willing to go through that list and help people say, yes, you're getting the best option you can.
Yes. Consider me your second opinion guy.
Right? I love that. There's a guy that we do a lot of radio with, Dr. Lee Sheldon. He is a noted area periodontist, and he's a really big proponent of second opinions because, it's funny. We think about experts, right? And the experts are trying to help us. But, we just had this conversation the other day. You have to remember you are the buyer. You're the consumer. You have to look out for what's going to be best and work best for you. So understand. The more you understand, the more you're going to be in control of that situation. So we're talking with Joe Pons of Canadian Meds of Melbourne. If somebody is hearing about this and saying, wow, I ought to give you a call or find out more, how do people learn and maybe how do they get involved if they want to have somebody take a look at their prescriptions?
Free complimentary consultation at 321-574-6976. Again, that's 321-574-6976. Call at any point in time. We're here to help.
All right. That's Joe Pons with Canadian Meds of Melbourne. We're going to be back on the second half of the Helping Seniors radio show in just a moment. And we're going to also have some updates on the Helping Seniors Choose Your Adventure car raffle. So stay tuned. We'll see you in a few.
12:33 in the afternoon here on 90.3 FM. You're listening to Helping Seniors of Brevard with your host, Kerry Fink, and his special guest, Joe Pons today. Kerry, a very interesting discussion you've got going here that affects probably just about everybody.
You said it so well, John Harper, because it's I think it's wonderful. You go to the doctor, they give you an antibiotic, and there's places you can go pick up those prescriptions for free. But every single day on the Helping Seniors helpline, we're getting calls from people who are having trouble with their finances making this work because not all the prescriptions, in fact, I would dare say almost all the prescriptions, are not free. So with that, welcome back, listener, and welcome back, Joe Pons. How are you doing, Joe?
I'm doing wonderfully well, sir. Thank you.
Good. It's always great to be on the radio here, lunchtime hour on 90.3 FM, WEJF, and hello again if you're listening online at WEJF.net. And again, these are all put together as podcasts, so they're available. You can find them on our helpingseniorsofbrevard.org website. You can find and subscribe to our Helping Seniors of Brevard YouTube channel, and certainly ask you to like and follow our Facebook page for the same reason. But you can find these resources here. And I'll tell you, a lot of people, they might be hopping in their car. They just got back in the car at 12:30 or something, and they maybe missed the first part of our discussion and say, well, this is really good. I'd like to go back and catch the rest. So that's why we make these available. And a lot of times, Joe, another thing that we find out is that people will hear the show and then think of somebody that they know that would really benefit from the information. And so that way they can just share a link and the other person can be kind of up to speed. And so with that kind of as a backdrop, what we try to do on the Helping Seniors radio program every Wednesday is try to impart some information that is going to be helpful to you in your own senior navigation. People say, what does the nonprofit Helping Seniors of Brevard do? And we say we're about senior navigation. And sometimes people get that right away and they understand, but just to spell it out, it means that, there's a road, you've heard that we wish somebody would give you a roadmap to life. What we try to do is give you the navigation you need, particularly in those senior years, because we've talked about this so often. Growing older, for the most part, is on-the-job training. There's no real way. The best you can hope to do is go to school and be prepared. So that's why, in addition to running the Helping Seniors Helpline, that free call at 321-473-7770, the other half of what we're always trying to do is do education, because the more that we can empower you, whether you are the senior yourself or you're loving and caring for a senior, or, as we always joke about in this county, live a few more days and you'll be a senior. So all of this information is appropriate for you, and we just want you to have be as well equipped and as well informed so that you can really maximize the enjoyment of your senior years. And Joe, that's one of the reasons why I think our conversation today is so important. You, as Canadian Meds of Melbourne, you help people with what unfortunately ends up oftentimes becoming a very, very significant part of a senior's budget, and that's dealing with prescriptions, Joe.
That's absolutely correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
And what I wanted to, we talked a little bit in the first part of the show about your own personal experience and how it brought you to this company, which now you've been at the helm of for well over a decade. I think you said 12 going into 13 years, which is about the same longevity of the Helping Seniors nonprofit, 100% local to Brevard, but been doing what we've been doing for about that same period of time. But the fact that people can save money on their prescriptions, I think, is so important. But it leads to one question I want to get kind of on the table and get discussed right away is that since you've been doing this for a while, you figured out where you can get prescriptions that save money and are 100% accurate as to what the prescription is called for. I want to preface this by telling a story. I've rolled off of a cruise ship in a port, and specifically, it comes to mind, it was Belize. Walk into the port, and there's all these drugstores right in the port. And you can go and tell them, I need these pills. Even if it's a prescription pill, apparently you don't need a prescription in Belize for that particular pill, and you just buy it. And I guess the question is, you get back on the ship, you're just hoping that it is what the bottle says, but you don't really know, do you?
I would say most often not, no.
Right, but what you do in the world of Canadian Meds, you make sure that's what on the label and what was prescribed is actually what the person's getting. Talk about that.
Yes, and the sad fact is that there are scammers out there all over the world, and medicine is a category that is full of people who don't mind sending you a sugar pill and saying that it's your heart medication and taking your hard-earned money. When you go to other countries, that's not to say that it can't be the genuine article, because the misconception that we have here is that American drug companies make American drugs for Americans here in America. Yes, that is true. However, there are manufacturers' factories literally all over the world. I don't know a whole lot about geoeconomics and all the rest of that stuff. All I know is that the same medication manufactured in one place can be 3 or 4 times as much as from the same factory in another country. Wow. And as far as what we do is that we go through our pharmacy, making sure that we go through reputable wholesalers and go directly to the factories where the product is made, so we can guarantee that the medication is in fact the same thing that you would get here. Also, there's independent testing. I don't know who they are. For those who remember back in the day of the shopper that would go in and test customer service and test the products, well, we have the same thing. So John or Jane Doe calls me and says, I want this medication. They will order that medication and have it tested to make sure that the percentage of the medication that is supposed to be in there is in there. It keeps us honest. It keeps the drug companies honest. And most importantly, it guarantees that our customers get what they need.
That is such an important part of this conversation because I remember talking with doctors who have talked about one of the reasons that they do like prescription medication is because of the standards that those pharmaceutical companies are held to, so that if the doctor prescribes a certain thing, and remember, isn't that a reason a lot of people are a little bit skeptical, maybe they don't need to be, of generics, because they want to be sure that that pill that they're getting, if it's not that, quote, name brand that they saw on TV at one point, that it really is, in fact, the same medicine. But I think we've kind of been schooled enough to understand that that is okay. If it's a generic version of that name brand, it's still held to that same standard.
Correct. Now, there are different companies that call generic products generic, but they're not.
Yeah.
And when we speak of generic, we're talking about the biochemical equivalent of the name brand. The difference being is that the size, shape, and color will be different because those things are patented. Beware. Beware. Do not just trust what somebody says when they use the term generic. Get the definition of that first.
That's a great point. And kind of related to that, I wanted to ask you, the question is, so people, we feel really empowered because we can go on our little computer and we can search out and say, oh, I need this medication. And we'll see all these things come popping up, buy your medications in Mexico, or something. I'm just making that up as a point. But I guess the real question is when you go online, it really is caveat emptor because you have no idea if those people are doing the right thing, if they just set up shop 20 minutes ago and put a link online. And I think it really speaks to the fact that you've been doing this for well over a decade. I think you said 12 or 13 years now, and you're local. This is another point I want to bring out because we talk about this a lot, Joe. For specific areas that helping seniors, we try to build a network. And as you know, at the Senior Resource Center, which we call Joe's Senior Resource Center after Joe Steckler, our president and founder, but hey, Joe, it could be for you too,
Right.
But the point we call Joe's Senior Resource Center is we've always had the vision of pulling together local resources that will make a difference. Here's what I mean. Like people will sit at home and they'll watch a commercial. They'll recognize an actor that they love the TV show that they starred in. And maybe that actor is talking about reverse mortgages. Maybe that actor is talking about an assisted living place for mom or dad. Or maybe that famous actor is talking about here's the Medicare coverage that might be best for you. They all wind up at the same place. There's a toll-free call 1-800-something, and we'll talk to you and get you set up. And I think it's wonderful, except that they're nowhere near us here in Florida. You can't sit down across the table, eyeball to eyeball, and say, here's my situation. They're going to look online just like you would look online from your home and try to say, well, here's a doctor that's like in Satellite Beach and you live in Titusville. And if you know this area, that makes no sense. But it looks okay on a little Google map or something like that. And I keep saying you have to work local. Find that Medicare person you trust locally. Find that person to help you sort through the 140, 150 plus assisted livings options in Brevard County. Find somebody who's local, who walks across the front threshold of those and knows what's going on in each of those buildings. When it comes to your question about reverse mortgage, talk to somebody who's in our community. And I want to say the same thing about you, Joe. You're somebody you can come to the office, sit down across the table with you, stare you in the eye, and say, "Here's my prescriptions." And it's a person that's accountable because not only do you know the marketplace, but you also are a member of the community, and this is where you live too.
Absolutely. As I jokingly tell my clients and prospective clients, is that part of the reason why people like to do business with me is that if something goes wrong, you can come to my office and choke me.
Well, the very fact that after 13 years nobody's choked you says you're doing things the right way.
Yes, sir. And that's the handshake, being able to sit across the table, have your complimentary consultation, where I take the time to answer the questions, even if the ones that you think of are not quite on point, or you just kind of think of something out of the blue and say, "Hey, little Joe, this is what I wanted to know." Well, guess what? I'm here, and I'm here for you. And that's where I think a lot of the difference between our company and other companies is that we are accessible.
Well, and that's so important. And the fact that you're an expert in this, because, it just takes we were talking about this, I want to talk for a minute about the donut hole. So we were talking with Jerry Hadlock in here last week. He's an expert kind of on Medicare and helping people get into the right insurance. And we got into this whole discussion about donut hole and Medicare Part D, because a lot of people don't realize that when you buy your medication, even if you go down to the drugstore and they say it's, you're going to pay your $20 for this, that's not what goes up against your, your total prescription cost the way the government sees it on the back end of Medicare, because they're seeing that $20 plus the other part that they're responsible for. So it might have cost you, I'm just making this up, might have cost you $20 out of pocket, but it might cost another $180 out of the government's pocket. So the part that got charged off to you was now $200 toward the donut hole, even though you only paid $20 out of your pocket. Am I saying that right?
You're saying that's exactly right.
So even if you have great coverage, say, I don't have to pay more than this. The whole discussion was that we were talking about family members who got so far into the year didn't realize that they'd hit a donut hole, and all of a sudden what they'd been used to going down to the drugstore and paying, $40, $60 a month for was something astronomical. And it was because they had, quote, fallen into that donut hole. And Jerry was explaining to us that there is a number, and it was like 5,000, I thought he said 5,500 approximately, but there's a number. Once you've gotten that much prescriptions between what you've paid and what the government's paid, you're kind of on your own for the most part. I think you get some coverage, but it's not at the same level. And he said, finally, if you get to the other side, then you get the help again. But that place in the middle really puts a lot of people on the breakers, You're used to that because you understand the entire cost of the medication, right?
Yes.
So even if somebody says, I've got great coverage, it's only costing me this much, doesn't mean that they shouldn't call you and say, can I have an appointment, and kind of go over so I really get the big picture here.
You're absolutely right. The misconception and the difficulty is all the legalese, the rest of it. They take the deductible, which most of us in insurance, your card, what do? You pay your deductible up front, and then they take care of things. Well, what they've done is they've taken that deductible and put it in the middle.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So we can smile and say, I got my prescription for $15, and that's a wonderful price for a month. And then 6 months later, then you realize that the government has been charged X number of dollars, and now you're responsible. The ratio flips. So say you're paying $8 of a particular medication, and that represents 20%. Well, now you're paying the 80%.
Wow.
Which makes it so much more difficult because people don't know this. They're not explained to in a way that makes it very plain. And that's part of what I do is I help people sit down, look at the numbers, and figure out where we can save money, because if you got to pay out of pocket, let's get your benefits to last longer, if not the entire year.
This is why what you're saying, Joe Pons, with Canadian Meds of Melbourne, is so important to pay attention to, right? Because whether you don't charge anything to sit down with somebody and look through their medication, you're going to get the advantage of having somebody who really understands all the ins and outs of the pharmaceutical industry, where to get the safest, best, most price-effective ways of filling those prescriptions done. And, just knowing you as a person, I know, just how you approach things. You're not like, well, I got to get to business. You're like there to try to serve the senior and make sure that they're getting the best scenario for their particular circumstance. And the problem is everybody's scenario is always going to be a little different, right?
That's correct. Our mandate is to help you remain healthy physically and fiscally. Nowhere in that mandate says that I have to sell you anything.
Well, thank you for what you do. I'm going to reserve a minute at the end to talk about the car raffle, but before we get there, I want to maybe hit the top one or two questions, frequently asked questions that you hear, because you've been doing this for some time. What do people come in your office and ask you?
Is it safe?
Oh, and I'm sure the answer you say is yes. But why?
Yes, because we verify where we get our medication from, and we can tell you exactly where in the world it comes from. Take a look on your medicine bottle that you got from your local quarter pharmacy and see if there's a made-in label on that medication.
That's an interesting point, because usually they give it to you in their little generic, like, sort of, I don't know what you call that color, yellowish, orangish bottle, and it doesn't have that. It has all, your prescription info on it. Interesting. I hadn't even thought about that.
Yes, correct.
What's another question you hear?
Is it legal?
And I'm sure the answer is yes, since you've been doing this for a few years.
Yes, it is absolutely legal. The concept of going to another country and buying your medication less expensively up until about 4 years ago was against the FDA's regulations. It has now changed. It is occurring so much because Americans are hurting so bad that they've changed the regulations as far as getting medicine for the individual, because it happens so much.
Wow. Any other really top of mind, frequently asked questions you hear?
How long does it take?
That's another good question.
Because we get our medicines from all over the world. It takes approximately 4 weeks.
Right.
So I tell people that let's plan ahead. Get your consultation. We'll figure out where your need is, and then we'll try to fit it in to the shipping schedule, which sadly, most of that time is here in the United States. We can get medicine from anywhere in the world to New York or Los Angeles within 7 days.
And then you got to find a way.
Right, and then it goes into customs and the post office. So, we need to make sure that you never, ever run out of your medication. And that's a very important point. Is that at no point do you sit there and say, well, gosh, I got to skip a dosage because my medicine isn't here. Or, worse yet, have to go to the local pharmacy and get a partial fill, which now takes your food money.
This is what we always talk about, the benefit of, planning ahead and not waiting to the last minute. Let's get our ducks in a row. So a good way to get our ducks in a row is called Joe Pons at Canadian Meds of Melbourne. And let's learn if we're going to save you money by going down that trail. And again, it doesn't cost anything to find out. It just starts with a phone call, right?
That's it. That's exactly right. You can go to our website on the World Wide Web, CanadianMeds-Melbourne.com. The easiest way is simply to pick up a phone and set an appointment, either by phone or in person, 321-574-6976. Ask for Little Joe.
Yeah, and of course you are in, although it is by appointment, you're a member of the Joe's Senior Resource Center, Brevard, right there at 1344 South Apollo Boulevard, and we're right there on the second floor. So it's a good place to be and access a lot of great services that are available through there. Or just call us anytime on the Senior Information Helpline at 321-473-7770.
Hey, Kerry, this is Jim Votro. I've got a question for Joe.
Yeah, let's go.
Okay, how do we know the difference between what Canadian meds are basically, they're safe. If you go to some of these other countries, like in Costa Rica and stuff, you can walk into La Farmacia, and just get anything. But a lot of times you get a pretty box, and it might not be the right pills. So how do you take care of that situation with Canadian meds?
We send the actual product made by the company. So, like Kerry was saying, here we get these little yellow, brownish bottles. Well, the manufacturer sends those in our medicine in blister packs, the way that you get cold medicine. And that's one of the ways that we send the fact sheet, the one actually manufacturer provided, which tells you exactly where it's made. Even before you purchase, I can tell you where it's coming from. The sad part is that, yes, you can go to Costa Rica, South America, you can go to Europe, and you can get medication. Sometimes it's real, sometimes it isn't, but it's up to you. And let's face it, as lay people, how do we know?
Right. Exactly. I mean, I'm amazed, totally amazed at the the ends that people go to in order to do this. They have to do it because of the financial resources involved. But one of the things I was really kind of thinking about is, how making sure that we're getting it. And you've gone to great ends and great lengths to make sure that you're getting the right stuff. And the medication that you're getting is actually coming from the pharmacy, going to Canada, and then coming back home, correct?
That is absolutely correct.
Well,
and that's a very important point, is that people get these things, and like you said, the La Pharmacia, does that mean that the person behind the counter is a pharmacist?
No, I only play one on the radio. I mean, I'm sorry, I don't know, but La Farmacia, I went into a facility in Costa Rica many years ago, and I was just amazed. They had pretty boxes, but the pills looked a little different, so I didn't go with that.
Yeah, and how are you going to know, right? I mean, we're the consumer. The doctor says you're supposed to take 10 milligrams of that, so that's what we're just trusting the doc and trusting the pharmacist.
Yes.
Which is my point. Go back to you, Joe. Is that that's why it's important to me that you've been doing this for a while, so you have some expertise and some knowledge on all of that. So thank you, Joe, for sharing that. One more time, your number.
321-574-6976. Again, that's 321-574-6976. Pick up the phone and give us a call. Complimentary consultation.
Yeah, Joe Pons with Canadian Meds of Melbourne. Well, in about the minute and a half I have left, I want to share with you about the Helping Seniors 8th Annual Choose Your Adventure Car Raffle. It all winds up on Sunday, October 27th, the American Muscle Car Museum. Somebody, once again this year, will go home in a brand new car. This year, Joe Pons, we have 6 cars in the running. So I'm going to name these, and I'm going to put you on the spot and say, what sounds good to you? So in the running, we have a Mitsubishi Outlander, just like our winner chose last year. We have a Mazda 3, which is a cool little sporty sedan. We have a Kia Sportage, which we've had a winner choose before. We've had we also have the Dodge, a Hornet, which is like a little sporty car, really V6 but souped up. And then we have the Jeep Compass, a little all-wheel drive Jeep, and even the Chevrolet Colorado, which is a pick-em-up truck, mid-size pick-em-up truck. What sounds good to you, Joe? The winner gets to pick. So if you win, what would you choose?
Well, after seeing the Mazda, I think it's probably just a little too small for me.
Yeah, you are a large guy.
Right? And because I've had sports cars in the past, the Hornet is probably a good pass. But I tell you what, that Colorado is a sharp truck.
I've heard a lot of comments about the Chevrolet Colorado, and it's been the first time in many years that we've had a truck in the mix. So you got to get a ticket, one for $25, 5 for $100 donation. How do you get those? Call us, 321-473-7770, or visit us at helpingseniorscarraffle.com. Well, that's about the time we have for today's show. Thanks for joining us for this week's edition of Helping Seniors Radio. We'll see you next week.